"Act like you're
never
mine,"
knew
whispered the Alpha
I could
King, but her
feel
only
this
condition
way
broke him.
until
Villagers
I
whispered that the
met
fog was
you.
not natural, that it carried the whispers of spirits bound to the blood of kings. At the heart of this cursed realm stood the palace of the Alpha King, Kale, a man whose name alone could bend men to their knees and silence women with fear. Kale was not just a king. He was a storm, a predator, a force the kingdom had learned to obey without question. He ruled with iron authority, yet there was a loneliness to him, a cold shadow behind the sharp lines of his face. Many had tried to pierce that shadow with flattery, charm, or obedience. All had failed. None had touched the part of him that belonged to no one. It was into this world that Leora stepped, her boots silent against the polished stone floors of the palace. She had been summoned under the guise of diplomacy, but she knew better. The court had been whispering her name for weeks, drawn by tales of her insight and courage. Leora was no stranger to danger, but even she could feel the weight of the palace pressing against her. The air seemed thicker here, the mist curling through the halls like living fingers. She walked with her head held high, her eyes meeting the wary stares of guards and courtiers alike. Kale had a reputation for testing everyone who entered his court, and Leora knew she would not be spared. Yet, for the first time in her life, she felt an excitement that was equal parts fear and thrill. Kale watched her from the balcony above, a shadowed figure among shadows. He noticed everything: the confident lift of her chin, the way her eyes did not flinch from the rumors that had already preceded her, the small, deliberate movements that marked her as someone used to commanding attention without needing to demand it. When she finally came before him, Kale's presence filled the hall like a tangible weight. He stepped down from the shadows, his long coat trailing behind him, boots silent against the stone. The courtiers whispered, bowing deeply, but Kale paid them no mind. His attention was fixed on Leora. "You are brave to walk through these halls without fear," Kale said, his voice low, almost a growl, carrying the power of command. "Or perhaps foolish." Leora met his gaze evenly. "I fear nothing that cannot be seen or understood," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "And I understand much more than people assume." Kale's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Few had ever spoken to him this way. Most faltered, swallowed by the weight of his presence. But Leora did not. She was a flame that did not flicker in the shadow of his storm. He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with something neither fear nor politeness could contain. "Act like you're mine," he whispered, the words brushing against her ear as if the air itself obeyed him. Leora's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. "I will act," she said, her voice steady, "but only on one condition." "And what is that?" Kale's interest sharpened, the flicker of a smile hiding a deeper curiosity. "That you will never claim my heart completely. I give my presence, not my soul," she said. "For if you seek to control what I cannot surrender, you will destroy us both." The words struck Kale with the force of a revelation. No one had ever spoken to him this way, not with such clarity, not with such unyielding resolve. He had spent his life taking what he wanted, bending kingdoms, hearts, and loyalties to his will. And yet here was Leora, standing like a cliff against a tide he could not command. "You are clever," he said, his voice softer now, almost admiring. "And dangerous." "Perhaps," she replied, "but not blind. I see who you are, King Kale. I see what you hide beneath the crown, and I will not be a pawn in a game you do not yet understand." The tension between them was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. Kale's eyes flickered, not with anger but with fascination. He had met many women who were beautiful, cunning, ambitious, but none had ever made him feel like this. None had made him feel seen, truly seen, without fear or flattery. For the rest of the evening, Leora remained in the grand hall, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows on the marble floors. She spoke with advisors, listened to whispers of rebellion, and noticed the quiet servants who moved like shadows in the corridors. Every detail of the palace, every hint of magic that lingered in the stones, she observed. And Kale watched her, unseen, tracing her movements, noting her courage and independence with a fascination that bordered on obsession. Days passed and their encounters became a delicate dance. Kale tested her boundaries with veiled threats, teasing questions, and subtle displays of power. Leora responded with intelligence, wit, and calm resistance. Neither would yield, yet neither could ignore the growing pull between them. Each conversation, each shared glance, carried an unspoken tension, a promise of something neither dared to name aloud. One night the moon hung high over the palace gardens, silver and sharp against the fog. Kale found Leora there, standing alone among the twisted hedges and statues that seemed to watch silently. The air smelled of rain and earth, and the world felt suspended between shadow and light. "You should not wander here alone," Kale said, stepping from the darkness, his voice a low rumble. "I am not afraid of shadows," Leora replied, her gaze steady. "Even the darkest corners hold nothing I cannot face." Kale stepped closer, the tension between them tightening like a drawn bow. "And yet you test me," he whispered, almost a challenge. "Do you understand what that means?" "I understand that even kings can be broken," Leora said softly, "but only by forces they cannot control, and I am no force to be controlled." For the first time, Kale felt a strange unease, a vulnerability that he had never known. He had ruled through fear and strength, yet here was a woman who made him question himself, who made him feel the fragility of his own heart. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face, and whispered, "Act like you're mine." Leora's eyes held his, calm and unwavering. "I will," she said, "but on my terms." Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to claim, to bend her to his will, but the truth in her eyes held him back. Something in her defiance, in her unwavering honesty, was more powerful than any crown, any army, any magic he had ever commanded. The night stretched around them, the mist curling through the garden like living fingers. Neither moved, neither spoke again. The only sound was the distant rush of the waterfall beyond the palace walls, echoing through the shadows. But when Kale turned to leave, he noticed a small slip of parchment tucked among the roots of an ancient oak. He picked it up, unfolding the delicate paper. Written in careful, deliberate script were the words, "Even kings cannot own the soul they do not earn." Kale stared at the message long after the candlelight had flickered and died. For the first time in his life, he felt the stirrings of uncertainty. He realized that Leora was more than a challenge, more than a thrill. She was a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he had always kept hidden. And that mirror, though fragile, terrified him. As he returned to his chambers, the palace seemed different. Shadows lengthened, the stones whispered with secrets he had not noticed before. And in the stillness, Kale knew one undeniable truth. Leora was not simply a presence in his court. She was a storm, and he was unprepared for the hurricane she had begun to unleash in his life. The night ended with Kale staring out over the mist-covered kingdom, the parchment clutched in his hand. His heart, long encased in iron, felt the faint stirrings of something unfamiliar: desire, fear, longing, and perhaps redemption. And somewhere deep within him, he knew the game had only just begun. Outside the palace, the fog swirled, carrying whispers of power, destiny, and the storm that was yet to come. And in the heart of it all, Kale whispered to himself, almost in awe, "I will have her, but at what cost?" And so the shadows of the crown deepened, and the delicate, dangerous dance between king and queen-in-waiting began, a dance that neither would emerge from unchanged. The palace of Valtharis seemed quieter than usual, yet the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Kale walked the dim halls, the parchment with Leora's words still clutched in his hand. He could not stop thinking about her, about the fire in her eyes and the courage in her voice. For the first time, he felt a longing that was not driven by power or possession. It was something entirely new and terrifying. Yet even as he tried to understand this strange pull, a shadow moved in the edges of his vision, whispering of things long hidden. The kingdom itself seemed alive, sensing the change in its ruler, aware that something delicate, dangerous, and undeniable had entered the palace. Leora, meanwhile, had retreated to a secluded garden hidden within the palace walls, a place few dared to visit. Here, the mist curled around ancient statues, their faces worn by time and weather. She had come to study the palace's secrets, but also to understand the man who had haunted her thoughts since their first encounter. It was in the quiet of that garden that Leora discovered a forgotten chamber beneath the old fountain. A spiral staircase led down into darkness, and the air smelled of damp stone and something older, something alive. Her heart beat faster as she descended, guided by instinct more than caution. At the bottom, she found a room lined with old scrolls and faded tapestries. The walls were etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Leora's eyes widened as she recognized the markings. They were warnings, curses, and fragments of forgotten magic. Among them, one scroll caught her attention. It was a chronicle of the Alpha King's bloodline, tracing back centuries. As she read, her pulse quickened. Kale's lineage was bound to a curse, one that had been whispered in legends but dismissed by the fearful. Every Alpha King who loved deeply, who trusted fully, suffered a torment so complete it could destroy both their heart and the lives of those they cherished. Leora's mind raced. She understood now why Kale had been the way he was, cold, commanding, and untouchable. It was not merely ambition or cruelty, it was fear. Fear of the curse that had haunted every man before him, a darkness that no amount of power could overcome. Meanwhile, Kale could feel the absence of Leora more sharply than ever. Her presence in the palace had been like fire, burning through the walls of his solitude, and now, in her absence, he felt hollow. He moved through the corridors like a predator searching for prey, yet the prey was unlike any he had known. She was not afraid of him, and that made him more vulnerable than he cared to admit. He sought her in the palace, in the gardens, in the libraries and halls where shadows lingered. Each time he arrived, he found only traces of her, a discarded glove, a parchment, or a faint scent of jasmine in the mist. The more he searched, the more he realized that Leora had a purpose beyond merely challenging him. She was uncovering truths that even he did not fully understand. It was on the third night of her secret exploration that Leora uncovered the heart of the curse. A crystal orb, dark as night, hovered above a pedestal in the center of the chamber. When she touched it, visions flooded her mind, memories of past kings, men who had loved and lost, whose hearts had been shattered and whose kingdoms had bled under the weight of despair. She saw their final moments, some mad with grief, some haunted by visions, all broken in ways that went beyond the physical. Leora staggered back, understanding the magnitude of the danger. She realized why Kale had never allowed himself to be vulnerable, why he ruled with fear rather than love. But she also saw something else, a spark of hope, buried deep beneath the iron of his heart, waiting for someone brave enough to awaken it. Kale, drawn by an instinct he could neither name nor resist, followed her trail to the hidden chamber. He found her standing before the orb, her hand hovering just above it, eyes wide with both fear and determination. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "It's dangerous, the curse, it could claim you." Leora turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "I am not afraid of it," she said. "But you fear it. That fear has shaped you, Kale. It has made you distant, cold, and untouchable. I see it now, I understand it, and I will not let it destroy you, not while I can help." Kale stepped closer, the air between them thick with tension. "No one can help me," he whispered, almost a confession. "Every king before me has failed. Every heart that trusted me, it was destroyed. And yet," Leora said softly, "I will try, because I see the man beneath the crown, the man beneath the shadow, and he is not broken beyond repair unless he chooses to remain so." Kale's chest tightened. Her words were not commands or flattery, they were truth. And truth was something he had rarely encountered, something he could not control. His desire for her, already intense, deepened into something more complex. Fear for himself, longing, and the fragile hope that she could teach him to love without destroying him. Their connection, fragile and electric, was interrupted by a sudden disturbance. The orb began to glow violently, reacting to their presence. Shadows twisted along the walls and a cold wind swept through the chamber. Both stepped back, instinctively ready, yet neither moved to flee. The shadows formed a figure, a wraith-like creature born of the curse itself. Its eyes were hollow, reflecting centuries of pain, and its presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Leora's hand trembled, but she did not step away from Kale. "You see it now," Kale said, his voice steady despite the danger. "This is what has haunted my bloodline. This is why I have never allowed myself to love fully. This is why I am alone." "I see it," Leora said, her voice strong, "and I will not abandon you." She reached for his hand, and in that simple touch the shadows seemed to hesitate. The creature lunged, a swirl of darkness and cold fury. Kale and Leora moved together, instinct and trust guiding them. He shielded her, and she guided him, their combined presence forming a fragile barrier against the curse's wrath. For the first time, Kale realized that strength alone could not defeat this enemy. It required trust, connection, and the courage to face the darkness within themselves. The shadows recoiled, shrieking as if in frustration, and then vanished into nothingness. The orb dimmed, its glow fading, leaving the chamber in near-complete darkness. Leora exhaled sharply, leaning slightly against Kale, her hand still in his. "You see now," she whispered, "how delicate it is, and yet how powerful it can be if we face it together." Kale looked at her, the weight of centuries pressing on him, and felt something unfamiliar. Gratitude, awe, and a longing that was no longer about possession, but connection. He had been tested, challenged, and for the first time he realized he could be vulnerable without losing himself entirely. But the curse was not so easily defeated. Leora knew this as well as he did. The past was never truly gone, and shadows always lingered where light had not yet reached. "Stay close," Kale said, his voice low, almost a plea. "I cannot face what comes next alone." "I will," Leora replied, "but on one condition. You must trust me completely, and you must let me see your heart, even the parts you fear." Kale's lips parted, almost in protest, almost in surrender. He had ruled kingdoms with fear, commanded armies with strength, and bent men to his will. But here, in the shadow of the curse, all that mattered was truth, and truth demanded surrender. As they emerged from the chamber, the palace seemed different, quieter, yet alive with anticipation. The mist clung to the halls like a living thing, carrying whispers of destiny, magic, and the fragile beginnings of a bond that could either save or destroy them both. Kale walked beside Leora in silence, the unspoken tension between them stronger than any words. He felt the weight of his ancestors' mistakes pressing on him, but for the first time, he also felt the fragile hope that he could change the course of his bloodline. Outside, the fog rolled over the palace gardens, curling around statues and hedges as if watching their every move. Leora paused, placing a hand on Kale's arm. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together. But remember, some shadows do not vanish so easily." Kale nodded, the words settling deep within him. For the first time, he realized that love, true, unguarded love, was a risk worth taking. And yet the knowledge of the curse's power made him wary. One wrong step, one lapse in trust, and everything could fall apart. As the moon rose high above Valtharis, their shadows stretched long and intertwined across the stone floors. The kingdom slept beneath a blanket of mist, unaware that its future was now entwined with the fragile alliance between a king and a woman who refused to be tamed. And somewhere deep within the palace, the remnants of the curse stirred, sensing the bond forming between Kale and Leora, and preparing to test it in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The cursed forest beyond Valtharis stretched endlessly, twisted and alive. Trees with blackened bark leaned over the narrow path as if to watch intruders, their branches whispering secrets of ages past. Mist clung to the undergrowth, curling in serpentine shapes, and faint lights flickered among the shadows, leading, or misleading, any who dared enter. Kale walked beside Leora, his steps careful but deliberate. The tension between them had grown since their encounter with the cursed wraith in the palace. The forest was dangerous, but he had learned that Leora was not only brave, she was wise. She knew things he had never considered, and she had saved him more than once, though he hated to admit it. "This place is alive," Kale said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It senses weakness." Leora's eyes scanned the twisting trees. "And strength. But strength alone will not protect us here. We must trust each other completely." Kale's jaw tightened. Trust was a foreign concept to him. His life had been built on fear, dominance, and control. Yet when he looked at Leora, he realized that without her, he would be vulnerable in ways he had never imagined. The forest had already tested him, and it would continue to do so. They walked in silence for hours, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of unseen creatures. The forest seemed endless, each turn revealing more shadows, more twisted trees, more whispers. At times, Kale felt the stirrings of the curse in the air, the weight of generations of suffering pressing against him, urging him to abandon Leora and flee. But he did not. He could not. Eventually, they reached a clearing where a pool of black water reflected the pale moonlight. The surface was still, almost unnaturally so, and in its reflection, Kale saw not only himself but shadows of the past, visions of every king in his bloodline who had succumbed to the curse. Some were twisted, some broken, all consumed by the darkness that came with love they could not control. Kale's heart tightened. "This is why I have never allowed myself to love," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Because the curse, it takes everything. Every heart that trusts me fully is destroyed." Leora stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "And yet," she said, her voice soft but firm, "here you are walking beside me. You did not flee. You did not push me away. That shows that even kings can change. Even curses can be challenged." Kale's eyes met hers, a mixture of longing and fear in his gaze. "I have spent my life commanding armies, bending kingdoms to my will, yet I cannot control this. You make me feel powerless." "And that is why you are capable of change," Leora replied. "Power without humility is destruction. Fear without courage is imprisonment. You are learning, Kale. Step by step, you are learning." The forest seemed to respond to her words. The mist swirled, the trees leaned closer, and the pool rippled as if acknowledging her truth. Suddenly, shadows moved along the edges of the clearing, more substantial than mist yet less than solid. The curse was testing them again. Kale's instincts sharpened, his body tensed. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice carrying authority and concern. "Do not let them separate us." Leora nodded, her hand finding his. Together they faced the shadows. The creatures that emerged from the darkness were forms of pain and regret, born from Kale's ancestors, phantoms of kings who had loved and lost, their spirits twisted by despair. They circled the couple, silent, eyes hollow, emanating cold and sorrow. Kale stepped forward, raising his hands as if to command them, but Leora stopped him. "No," she said firmly. "This is not a battle to fight with strength alone. This is a battle of trust, of unity. Face them together as equals." Kale hesitated, then allowed her hand to guide him. They stood side by side, hearts beating in unison, and for the first time Kale felt something he had never experienced: surrender, not as weakness but as power. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the bond between them. One of the phantoms lunged, a shadowy figure screaming in anguish. Kale instinctively raised his arm to protect Leora, but she stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest. A warm light emanated from her touch, weaving through the darkness, calming the fury of the spirits. "It is our unity that breaks them," she whispered. "We are stronger together than fear or curse." The shadows faltered, then dissipated like smoke in the wind, leaving the clearing silent once more. Kale exhaled, a mixture of relief and astonishment coursing through him. "I did not think it possible," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "Anything is possible when trust guides us," Leora replied. "Even a king can learn to love without fear." For a long moment they stood in silence, the moonlight washing over them. Kale's hand found hers, his fingers entwining with hers. The connection was electric, unspoken, and dangerous in its intensity. For the first time, he felt vulnerable, not in a way that made him weak, but in a way that made him aware of his own heart. "I fear what comes next," Kale admitted quietly. "Not for me, but for you. The curse may not be done with us." Leora's eyes softened, yet her expression remained resolute. "Then we face it together. Whatever comes, I will not abandon you. But you must promise me one thing. You will not let pride or fear rule your heart. You must trust me fully." Kale hesitated, the weight of generations pressing on him, yet the warmth of her hand and the strength in her eyes gave him courage. "I promise," he said finally. They spent the night in the clearing, talking in hushed tones about their pasts, their fears, and the desires they barely understood. Leora spoke of her childhood, of the lessons she had learned about trust, courage, and standing against forces stronger than herself. Kale shared fragments of his past, how the curse had shaped him, how fear had guided his rule, and how he had never truly known freedom from it. By dawn, they were no longer two strangers bound by circumstance. They were allies, partners, and something deeper, something neither dared to name. Yet the curse still lingered, like a shadow at the edge of their bond, reminding them that even trust and love had their limits. As they prepared to leave the clearing, a whisper of wind carried a faint voice echoing through the trees. "The heart of the Alpha King will be tested. Only one will emerge unbroken." Kale froze, tension radiating through him. "The curse, it's not gone," he said grimly. "It is watching, waiting." Leora placed a hand on his arm. "Then we must be ready. Together we are stronger than its shadow, and if we fail as one. But I do not intend to fail." Kale looked at her, the words stirring something deep within him. He wanted to protect her, not merely as a king or a warrior, but as a man who had finally learned what it meant to care without controlling. And he realized, with a mixture of fear and longing, that he could not live without her presence beside him. The forest seemed to acknowledge their bond, the mist lifting slightly as the first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy. But even as light returned, the sense of unease remained. Shadows lingered at the edges, watching, waiting, testing. The curse was patient, and the next challenge would demand not only courage and trust but sacrifice. Kale and Leora emerged from the forest hand in hand, their bond solidified yet fragile. They returned to the palace with a new understanding. The power of their connection was real, but it was not invincible. The curse would strike again, and when it did, they would face it together, or be consumed by it. That night, Kale stood on the balcony of his chambers, looking over the misty kingdom. Leora had returned to her room, but her presence lingered in his thoughts, her strength and courage weaving through his mind like a melody he could not forget. "I will not lose her," Kale whispered to the night. "I cannot and I will not." And somewhere deep within the shadows of the palace, the remnants of the curse stirred once more, sensing the bond forming between the Alpha King and the woman who refused to be tamed, and preparing to test it in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The palace of Valtherus was silent under the silver glow of a full moon, yet the air was thick with tension. Kale stood on the balcony, staring into the mist that blanketed his kingdom. The forest beyond still whispered of the curse, and the memories of past kings haunted him like shadows that could not be dispelled. He had faced fear, pain, and darkness, but the final test was yet to come. Leora entered the hall silently, her presence calm and resolute. She had returned from her own journey through the palace's hidden corridors, gathering knowledge, guidance, and the strength she would need to face what lay ahead. She had seen more than Kale knew, discovered more than anyone in the kingdom could imagine. Kale turned to her, his expression a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. "The curse, it watches us still," he said quietly. "Its power is ancient, patient, and merciless." Leora's gaze was steady. "Then we face it together. Fear alone cannot control us. Only unity, trust, and courage can break its hold." Their hands met, fingers entwining, a silent promise that whatever came, they would not face it alone. And yet, even as they stood together, shadows stirred within the palace walls. The curse had felt their growing bond, and it was preparing its ultimate challenge. From the depths of the throne room, a chilling wind rose. Candles flickered and went out, plunging the chamber into darkness. The mist seeped through the cracks in the walls, curling around pillars like living serpents. A voice, ancient and hollow, echoed through the hall. "The Alpha King has dared to love. The bloodline has dared to trust. Only one may rise, the other will fall." Kale's chest tightened. He had faced tests before, but this was different. The curse demanded choice, one heart to endure, one to be sacrificed. Leora's grip on his hand steadied him, her presence a lifeline against the rising terror. "We are not alone," she whispered. "Even if the curse demands sacrifice, it will not claim us without a fight." Shadows coalesced into forms, phantoms of past kings, twisted and mournful, their faces locked in agony. They surrounded Kale, their hollow eyes demanding penance for centuries of pain. Leora stepped forward, placing herself beside him, her hand on his chest. Light emanated from her touch, intertwining with the strength of Kale's will, forming a barrier neither darkness nor curse could easily penetrate. "You cannot do this alone," she said firmly. "Even kings must learn to rely on what is greater than power. Trust me, Kale, trust us." Kale's resolve hardened. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, he embraced vulnerability not as weakness but as strength. He stepped into the center of the throne room, his eyes meeting the phantoms, unflinching. "I will not allow fear to rule me," he declared. "I choose love, trust, and redemption over control and isolation, and I will not walk this path alone." The phantoms surged forward, but the combination of Kale's newfound vulnerability and Leora's unwavering strength pushed them back. The palace itself seemed to respond, stones glowing faintly, torches reigniting as if celebrating the courage of the living. The cursed wraith, the final remnant of the bloodline's torment, rose from the shadows. It was larger, more terrifying than anything they had faced before, a swirling vortex of darkness and sorrow, a reflection of centuries of pain. It spoke without words, sending visions of despair into their minds, images of failed love, broken hearts, and a kingdom left in ruin. Kale faltered, the memories of his ancestors threatening to overwhelm him. He saw kings who had loved too much, who had trusted too freely, only to be consumed by the curse. The weight of his bloodline's mistakes pressed down upon him like an unyielding storm, but Leora's hand on his chest brought him back to the present. "Focus on the truth," she whispered. "Not the shadows, not the past. Focus on us. Focus on what we choose together." Kale's breath steadied. He felt the warmth of her presence, the courage in her gaze, and the power of their bond. He realized that the curse had thrived on fear, on isolation, on doubt. And now none of those things existed between them. Together, they stepped forward, confronting the wraith directly. Kale's hands were steady, Leora's light guiding them both. "You will not have us," Kale declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "We are stronger than your shadows. We are bound not by fear but by choice, trust, and love." The wraith screamed, a sound that shook the palace, swirling into a vortex of light and darkness. But Kale and Leora held firm, their hands clasped, their hearts synchronized. The light from Leora's touch intensified, flowing through Kale, through the very stones of the palace, until the darkness could no longer withstand it. With a final, deafening cry, the wraith dissipated, leaving silence in its wake. The shadows lifted, the torches blazed brightly, and the mist began to recede. The curse, ancient and relentless, had been challenged and defeated not through force but through unity, trust, and love. Kale fell to his knees, exhausted both physically and emotionally. Leora knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You faced the darkness and you chose the light." Kale looked at her, his chest heaving, his mind still reeling from the confrontation. "No," he said, his voice shaking with awe. "We did it. You were the strength I did not know I could find." For the first time, he allowed himself to feel completely. Not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a man who had been broken and made whole again. He had learned the power of vulnerability, the courage in trust, and the depth of love that did not demand possession but respected choice. The dawn broke over Valtharis, the first rays of sunlight scattering the lingering mist. The kingdom seemed transformed, brighter, alive with possibilities. Kale and Leora emerged from the throne room, their hands still clasped, their hearts aligned. The people who had feared the shadows of the palace now looked upon their rulers with hope, sensing the change not only in Kale's strength but in his heart. In the quiet of the courtyard, Kale turned to Leora. "I was broken by fear, by the curse, by the weight of my bloodline," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But you have made me whole. I cannot imagine life without you beside me." Leora smiled, her eyes shining with the light of the dawn. "And I will be here," she said softly. "Not because you are a king, not because of your strength, but because I choose to be. Always." Kale drew her close, their foreheads touching, and in that moment all the shadows of the past seemed to dissolve. The kingdom, the curse, the weight of generations, they no longer held power over them. What remained was trust, choice, and love, the true crown of a king and the bond of two souls who had faced darkness and emerged together. Yet even as they stood in the light, there remained a whisper in the wind, a reminder that life, love, and power were never without challenges. But Kale no longer feared them. With Leora beside him, he knew they could face whatever came next, together, as equals, as partners, as hearts united by courage and redemption. The palace doors opened, sunlight flooding the halls. Courtiers and citizens alike emerged, sensing the change. The Alpha King, once a figure of fear, now walked with a new presence, not of intimidation but of strength tempered with wisdom. And beside him was Leora, not a queen to be controlled, but a woman whose courage, intelligence, and heart had saved them both. Kale looked at her, a gentle smile breaking across his face. "I was taught that kings rule through fear," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But I have learned, true power comes from love, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable." Leora squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "And you have learned well. The curse is gone, Kale, but the lessons remain. Let us build a kingdom worthy of what we have found together." He nodded, feeling the weight of centuries lift from his shoulders. For the first time he felt free, not just from the curse, but from the fears that had defined his life. And as he stood beside Leora, hand in hand, he realized that the greatest victories were not won through force or command, but through love, courage, and the unbreakable bond between two hearts willing to face the shadows together. The mist retreated, the first birds sang, and Valtharis awakened under the promise of a new era. Kale and Leora walked forward, not as king and subject, not as master and companion, but as equals bound by choice, respect, and a love forged in shadow and light. And somewhere in the silence beyond the mountains, the remnants of the old curse sighed and faded, unable to touch hearts that had chosen trust over fear, love over control, and hope over despair. Kale whispered almost to himself as he gazed at Leora, "I was broken, but you have made me whole." Leora smiled, her hand on his heart. and we will remain whole together always.